Alyssa Slotkin, a candidate from Michigan that we had supported in that first cycle, who's now running for Senate from Michigan. And she came back to us afterwards, and we'll never forget it. She stood up on this piano bench in someone's living room, and she just said, listen, I couldn't have done it without support of groups like you. I needed a boost to get my campaign off the ground, and you helped me do that.
In partnership with ActBlue, this is Build the Change. I'm Alok Vadmenon, an author, poet, actor, and advocate, and your host from season 1. In this mini-series, we're bringing you stories of the incredible work people are doing on the ground right now in anticipation of this historic election. In these next few episodes, you'll hear from our lead producer, Edie Allard, who will bring you fascinating conversations with folks making change in their communities. Whether it's getting Democrats on the ballot in red counties or organizing fundraisers for their favorite candidates. In discovering these stories, we found that every path to action is unique, but maybe you'll see yourself in some of these people who decided to take action, and maybe you'll want to build some change of your own. Welcome back.
We talked earlier this season about how deceptive political bubbles can be, that areas we think are entirely red or entirely blue can actually be a lot more diverse beneath the surface. It is possible for Democrats in a place like Huntington County, Indiana, for example, to talk to their neighbors, build a community, and fill the ballot. But for folks who live in a political bubble, it often doesn't feel as diverse as it actually is. I've lived in blue areas my whole life, and now I'm in New York City. While New York State last voted for a Republican president in 1984, the last time New York City did that was 1924. Before getting into media, I didn't really interact with Republicans often in my day-to-day life. In some ways, it's kind of comforting to be surrounded by people who seem to agree with you, but that comfort can be misleading. For many in that boat, the 2016 election was a rude awakening.
I thought everybody understood that Donald Trump was not a serious person.
Tom Hallock is a New York City to Massachusetts transplant. He has spent most of his life around Democrats. For him, the rude awakening hit in the summer of 2016, as Trump dominated the news cycle.
I realized that he was being taken seriously, that he was likely to win the Republican nomination, and that, in fact, he was a threat to win the presidency. And I thought that would be devastating for America and so many of the things that I care about and believe in. So I was trying to think, what can I do as a single person from this blue state of Massachusetts that would have any impact on a national election? And it's been something that I've thought a lot about, and I've always tried to figure out what it means to be an active citizen. So I just started talking to some friends, and we organized a group that went down to North Carolina, which at that point we thought might be a tipping point state in the 2016 election. And it was interesting. I said, I'd love to go to Durham. The people in the North Carolina coordinated campaign said, well, we can put you in Durham, but if you really want to go where we're needed, we want to send you to Rocky Mount. And I said, where?
Rocky Mount is a city of fewer than 60,000 residents, 45 minutes east of Raleigh, the state's capital. Historic brick mill buildings lie along the Tar River that winds through town. And in 2016, that area of North Carolina was so gerrymandered in favor of Republican candidates that a federal court later ordered the state to redraw the district lines. Tom went to Rocky Mount for 12 days before the election in 2016, knocking on doors to get out the vote.
Even though I was this tall, white northerner, canvassing in primarily Black communities in the South, we really felt like we were playing a constructive role. People were thanking us for coming because we were sharing information about how to vote that they did not have. And, at first I was self-conscious about being an outsider, and I decided to make a virtue of it. So I remember knocking on one door, and I told the person that asked, listen, I'm not from around here. I'm from Boston, and I'm so concerned about this election that I've come down to, work down here because you're more of a swing state. And he stepped back and he looked at me and he said, wait, you came all the way down here to organize my community? I should be doing that. And where do I sign up? And that night at a rally, this man came running across the parking lot waving a clipboard. And he said, "Hey," he said, "remember me? I did what I said. I signed up."
For those living in progressive political bubbles, the comfort of living in the midst of what seems to be a politically like minded majority can quickly turn to feelings of powerlessness. When your state is not considered up for grabs, it can feel impossible to have an impact on federal races. Well, Tom took his sense of hopelessness and did something with it in 2016.
And I think it's easy to think that our sphere of political influence is limited to, the communities that we vote in, and really we can find common cause with so many more people. Like who, this wasn't a senatorial election, but who gets elected to represent North Carolina in the Senate, affects the balance of power in the Senate. And so in that sense, we all have a stake in it. And we just need to think of our kind of role a little more broadly than being limited to the congressional district or state that we live in, and see this as a national struggle for democracy and so many other things that we care about.
But of course, the election didn't pan out the way he hoped.
I'll never forget, election night in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, where we were sitting around this county Democratic office and watching the results come in and taking in what had seemed unthinkable. And I just remember a moment where I thought to myself, this is going to change how I spend the rest of my life.
Tom felt called to action. The question was how to harness the energy of all those people wanting to do something and create an effective movement.
And when I came back to Boston, there, of course, were many other people that had, similar feelings. And there was a group of us that started talking together, convened by the local Democratic Party chair. And we were just thinking, what can we do? And at that time, there were all of these kind of living room groups that had sprouted up after the election, and they were kind of working independently of each other. So we thought we could coordinate our efforts. So we started working together. We did the research to identify, okay, which races are the ones that are likely to determine the balance of power in the House, and what could we do to help these candidates? And we thought, well, as people that don't live in those districts, the things that we could do would be to gather resources and help fund their campaigns so that they could get a boost. These people were running in areas that didn't have as much Democratic or Progressive Party infrastructure, and they needed the resources to get going.
Force Multiplier helps other people do what Tom and his friends first did for themselves in 2016. Step outside the political bubble to make a difference. In 2018, the organization managed to have a huge impact.
So that first cycle, we supported 15 candidates in races around the country, and we would have house parties, events in people's homes, physical house parties before COVID. And we would invite all of our friends, and our group grew from the founding group of 12 to about 700, actually to 1,200 that first cycle. We raised about $700,000, and 13 of the 15 candidates won. So that was kind of the first phase of our growth, was focusing on the House and doing it through those in-person events. And that ended up being really validated by Alyssa Slotkin, a candidate from Michigan that we had supported in that first cycle, who's now running for Senate from Michigan. And she came back to us afterwards, and we'll never forget it. She stood up on this piano bench in someone's living room, and she just said, listen, I couldn't have done it without support of groups like you. I needed a boost to get my campaign off the ground, and you helped me do that.
So, what materially did getting these resources together look like? There's you and you have some politically active friends who want to do something.
Well, none of us had done this before. So I think, as so many other activists have found, we just learned together. And our basic tools at that point were a website, an email list, Act Blue, and our own networks of friends. So we started organizing around these events, and we would send out invitations to people, and people would donate before, or at that point you could donate in person when you came to the event, and then you would be signing up for our email list. So It was basically through that kind of relational networking and email marketing and web marketing that we were able to start building the group. And through that, we just started reaching more and more people.
The value proposition of Force Multiplier wasn't, and isn't, just bringing people together. It's also about helping political donors choose which races could most benefit from their contribution.
So we're an all-volunteer group. We don't take any contributions ourselves, and it's not possible to give directly to us. So we're really advising donors. We're really giving recommendations about where your donations can have the most impact. I think all of us have the experience of just being inundated with requests for funds and they all sound, important and worthwhile. And sometimes there's an element of urgency from it, but how do you evaluate that? So I think that's probably the primary service that we provide. So we are basically giving you recommendations.
How do you determine those baseline people that are going to be supported? What does that calculus actually look like?
Yeah. Okay. So we are looking basically at three things. First is how competitive is the race? Is this a race that is within kind of the margin of effort? Is it something that we could realistically expect to win? We're not looking for guaranteed wins at all, but so it's kind of that sweet spot of a race that could go either way. That's the first thing. And the way that we determine that is we do use the ratings of Cook and Sabato and Inside Elections as a starting point. We also look at the voting history of a district or a state, how they voted for the House and Senate, but also how they voted in the presidential race. So we have kind of a metric of a Biden score, and that often will alert us to opportunities. The second thing that we look at is sort of the strategic importance. Is this really a race that will help us to win the majority in the House and Senate? And the last thing that we look at is the financial need. So we use FEC reports and other information that we can gather from campaign and other groups about the relative financial strength of a candidate and of their opponent. And we look at what it costs to win that race last time and help to see that if a candidate really has the resources. So we want to direct our donors to candidates that are in competitive races that will make a difference, where their donations will have an impact.
At this point, how is the organization looking? What are you working on right now?
Yeah, so we expanded our fundraising from just raising for House candidates to raising for Senate candidates, and we were part of a national effort to flip the Senate in 2020 and to hold it in 2022, and got to work on the runoffs with now Senators Ossoff and Warnock. And then we also got into doing some movement funding, so that really we're at this point raising funds for a whole kind of democratic and progressive ecosystem, and Act Blue enables us to do all that. So we're working with groups that are locally based, that have local leadership, and that look like the communities that they're organizing, that are registering and educating and mobilizing voters and helping ensure that their votes actually count and that they have some support when they encounter voter suppression and things like that. And we're doing that in partnership with two national partners. One is America Votes, and the other is the Rural Democracy Initiative. And then we also are supporting some of the state parties that have become really innovative: Wisconsin and North Carolina and Michigan and Arizona. And they also have a key role to play. So our fundraising has expanded.
Right now, you can see Force Multiplier's latest picks on their website: 4 key Senate races, 19 House candidates, and various partner organizations that support voter empowerment across the country.
We're constantly updating them so that at any given moment when you go to our website, you'll see the recommendations that reflect our sense of the current race.
Though Force Multiplier is mostly known as a fundraising organization, the group has also created opportunities to support campaigns in other ways.
We also have a program called Destination Democracy, and you can find information about that on our website as well. But that's a way to contribute your time as well as your money by canvassing or signing up for phone banks for the candidates that we are supporting, and we're getting a terrific response to this. A lot of people in our community are also looking for a way to get connected, and particularly if you haven't been involved before, I think it can be difficult to find your way in. And so we are offering a way to get in and to find volunteer opportunities that matter through destination democracy.
This multifaceted approach is the key to political success. We heard from two people that really exemplify the diverse work Force Multiplier is doing in the critical weeks before this election. This first message highlights why partnering with grassroots organizations on the ground in key states is a really impactful strategy.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Ey, she, her, the Executive Director of Forward Montana and Forward Montana Foundation. I live in Bozeman, Montana, a place I've called home for the last 10 years. Forward Montana is a young person-led civic engagement organization. We build the civic and political power of young people so that Montana's politics and policies look a little bit more like us: compassionate, sustainable, and equitable. Force Multiplier allows us to receive grassroots donations. Force Multiplier uses a trust-based model of philanthropy. Not only are they incredible to work with, but they make it so easy for their partners like us. By directing funds directly to an organization, we can build a relationship directly with donors instead of having to go through another entity. We are incredibly grateful. It allows us to pay staff a fair wage and create joyful spaces for young people because they deserve it. We just wrapped up our voter registration program for the election. We are so proud to have collected nearly 8,000 voter registration forms this year. And now we're hitting the doors of young people to make sure their voice is heard this November. We ran a door-to-door canvassing program this summer to reach young people who might not be out in the community at high-traffic events. One of our team members registered a first-time voter who was so excited to connect with us and answer her questions. When she had asked her dad, the only response she got was, "Google it."
Partnering with local organizations in swing states is kind of like a remote version of what Tom and his friends did in North Carolina. And it really works. These groups know what their community needs, and they have a deep understanding of how to direct resources and engage with voters. But like we said, a diverse approach is the key to success. So here's a donor who used Force Multiplier to get involved.
My name is Chris. I recently retired after 40 years of working for civil liberties organizations. So in one way, I've always been involved in politics, but never as an active partisan participant. So when I started looking at current election, which is so crucial to the future of the country, I wanted to do more. And I really didn't know how. But luckily, I had a friend who is the co-chair of Force Multiplier. And one of the things that Force Multiplier encourages people to do is to hold house parties, online Zoom parties, consisting of their friends and relations to introduce them to Force Multiplier. I was involved in a couple of these sessions. I had worked with Booksellers Association and independent booksellers and publishers. We put together a call for them. I also did a house party for members of my family. And in fact, I co-chaired one party with one of my cousins, and another of my cousins, even before she had participated in our session, it was inspired by hearing about a house party, did her own. And subsequently, people from those sessions volunteered to do sessions of their own. So this is how Force Multiplier has grown. It's person-to-person communication that has really been so effective. Force Multiplier is also providing support for people who want to go beyond donating money. I live in New York, but I'm going to step over the border into Pennsylvania and canvass for the ticket. They've been holding my hand the whole way.
Building political inroads is about a lot of people coming together with diverse approaches, empowering voters, talking to friends and family, raising money for candidates at multiple levels of government. All of these actions are important, and even one person can have an impact. Hosting the house party or knocking on the door that changes someone's mind or encourages them to pitch in. As a result of efforts like this, Tom has seen Democrats win increasingly competitive races in recent election cycles.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind are the Georgia Senate races in 2020, that Georgia did not seem to be a likely tipping point state for the Senate, let alone the White House. And suddenly we were getting signs that it really was in play. And we really had to take a hard look and say, is this a place for us to get involved? And we had a moment where we said, yes, we're all in for Georgia. And we started supporting not only Warnock and Ossoff, but also Carolyn Bourdeaux, who was running for a House seat at that point. And we started supporting groups like New Georgia Project that were working in there and tried to direct resources to that area. And we ended up, it was well over $1 million that we raised for the Georgia campaign. And then, of course, it went to runoff, and it was just a totally unforeseen thing and a jubilant moment when we were able to win those races. I think even though we raised a significant amount of money for that, I think we never really are under the illusion that we can make the difference in this. What we see is that we can do our part and be part of a national movement. There are other groups around the country, but I think we see ourselves as being part of an ecosystem that can help lift up candidates like that.
Force Multiplier went from raising just under $700,000 in its first year to a total of $25 million to date. According to Tom, the organization is raising $500,000 per week for candidates across the country as the election approaches. He sees that exponential growth as a sign that people are really concerned about this country, and they're looking for ways they can make a difference.
I think people are seeing every day that the election is likely to be very close, and that it will come down to a handful of states and a limited number of voters in those states. Biden won the presidency by 7 million votes overall in 2020, but he won in the Electoral College by 43,000 votes in 3 states. So we see an election that's similar to that, and I think everybody's very aware of how close it will be and how high the stakes really are. But I think with the Project 2025 and, just the broad threat to the civil society that we know, the democracy that we hold dear, is what's motivating people. And a lot of people are aware that it may not be their vote that determines it, that it's with the Electoral College that there really are specific battlegrounds for the presidency as well as the House and Senate.
And what races are you looking at right now that you're kind of, again, fighting your nails over and really hoping to see, the tide turn in our favor?
Well, again, on the Senate, I think certainly Ohio and Montana, that we thought that from the beginning of the cycle that Democrats basically have to win 2 races in red states in order to hold the Senate. It's tough. There's a lot of money going against them. And we also have been supporting grassroots organizing in both of those states. So many of these states of the battleground states have significant rural populations, 35 or 40% that live in small towns and rural areas. There's a lot of common ground with rural voters over issues from infrastructure like broadband to abortion rights to public education, as well as, of course, the economy. So I think helping to turn out those voters, we hope, will give a boost to both of those campaigns. But right now, they look like the decisive races. So those are 2 that we're really thinking a lot about.
What Force Multiplier gives these candidates and donors is hope and a path to action. If you're feeling powerless where you are, know that you can make a difference in elections both locally and nationally.
I think that's so important to have that sense of agency and to not feel powerlessness. I mean, feeling the hopelessness and powerlessness, and it's so easy to go there, really takes away your power and your agency as a citizen and as a person to do what you can. And it's really important that we all push through that. I know it's very easy to be kind of an armchair activist. And, I felt like for a while, did an awful lot of complaining and yelling at the TV and whatnot before I started finding some things that I could actually do. And it's just so satisfying when you can do that and when you can find other people to do it with.
Beyond the election, no matter who wins, Force Multiplier sees more work to be done.
I think we also see ourselves as staying with the groups and candidates that we're supporting through the election process. A lot of the groups that we're supporting are really on the front lines of that work of fighting voter suppression and working to protect the election. So we see ourselves as being involved through the full cycle. And then we see ourselves continuing, regardless of the outcome of the election. The things that are going on in our country are not going to be resolved by one election. So Force Multiplier will continue to do this. I don't know exactly what it will look like after the election, but the work will remain and we'll be there to do it. Then I think shifting into the following year, there'll be a new slate of Senate candidates. We'll have all the House seats that are up again. And I think there's the deeper work of just building democracy by getting people registered, and that kind of work will continue. So we will have a strategy. We will identify the areas that we think need attention, and we'll keep going. And hopefully we'll be doing it with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the White House and a House majority and maybe even a Senate majority. But if not, we'll be there anyway.
There's so much at stake in this election, from access to reproductive care and LGBTQ rights to healthcare, gun control, and more. Support and even fundraise for the candidates and organizations who are working to preserve our democracy and build a better future with ActBlue. Learn more at actblue.com/buildthechange.
Build the Change is created in partnership with ActBlue and produced by Wonder Media Network. Our production team includes Edie Allard, Sarah Schleed, and Madeline Gore. Our editors are Jenny Kaplan and Lindsay Cradowell. Our executive producer is Jenny Kaplan. Our showrunners are Rohita Javangula, Lydia Bayer, and Kara Zarkatis.